Welcome back. It is now time for our first incredible keynote speaker, Ally Watson, changing the face of technology. With a background in software engineering, Ally Watson is the Scottish-born CEO and founder of Code Like a Girl, an Australian social enterprise that educates and empowers women with coding skills to enter into the technology industry. As one who has seen firsthand how traditional gender stereotypes have limited opportunity for women across society at large, she strives tirelessly each day towards breaking these biases. Recently decorated with an Order of Australia medal, Watson is a multi-award-winning social entrepreneur whose heartfelt motivation is to create innovative learning environments where every woman from any background feels included, inspired, and capable in the world of technology. Ally shares a humorous, honest, and inspiring account of how she fell in love with computer science, what it's actually like being a girl in the technology industry, and her working life as a web and mobile developer. Hear the story of why she was motivated to start the social enterprise Code Like a Girl, as she shares her belief that empowering women and girls with coding and digital literacy skills will help towards a better future. It's enough from me. What a bio. Let's go to Ally Watson OAM, changing the face of technology.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Amanda. I love amazing introduction. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting, not Zooming, broadcasting in from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I would love to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So it's been 7 years since I started Code Like a Girl, and a lot has happened since then. Historically, there's never been a better time to be born as a woman, and progress is really happening, particularly when we look at the technology industry. We're seeing much more organizations make a concerted effort to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the industry needs you, and I'm here today on a bit of a mission to inspire at least one person into technology through my story. So I'm just about to share my screen. Give me a little quick second. Excellent. So on my agenda today, as well as my mission, I'm going to chat about why representation really matters, why it's so important. And then we're going to talk about my story. When I say we, I mean I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, how I came to be in the technology industry myself, but also how Code Like a Girl started. So let's get stuck in. We're going to begin with the representation part, and it's such an important piece when we look at digital and technology. You may not know this, but there are more men named Andrew running ASX 200 companies than there are women. And if you are not familiar with the ASX 200, it's basically the top sort of public companies in Australia that are in the stock exchange. Now, it's no surprise that in 2022, top performing CEOs and founders are actually more likely to have an engineering type degree than they are an MBA. Now, Sheryl Sandberg was one of the first female executives at Facebook, as well as one of the first pregnant executives at Facebook. And she didn't realize until this point that there was actually no priority parking spaces for pregnant women at the office. And the reason I'm telling you this is we are all susceptible to blind spots. Sometimes we don't know problems exist until we experience them ourselves. And the reality that we face today is a world that is largely being led and designed by men, for men. And as more women join the labour workforce, we're finding more and more of these blind spots. Now, I'm going to reference a few things during this talk, but there's an incredible book by a woman called Caroline Perez called Invisible Women. And the book outlines many gaps in knowledge and in insights that have led to these sort of blind gender bias in our everyday lives. And the consequences are quite shocking. They range from things that don't seem that important, such as longer lines at the bathroom for women or colder office environments for women, for instance. But then there's the more lethal consequences of this gender bias, such as car crashes killing more women and children than anyone else because they've been designed to the average male measurements. Now, there's a study, 2015, a study where they rated piano players by level of acclaim. And in the top 12 internationally, only 2 were women. So the conclusion you might make is that maybe men were just innately better piano players. Well, actually, they also measured the handspan of the piano players, and the 2 female players in the top 12 had larger than average handspans. So the conclusion wasn't that men were better at piano playing, but the design of the standard keyboard was based on the average male measurements, preventing the average woman from reaching her full potential. Now, I love this quote from Stella Young. My disability exists not because I use a wheelchair, but because the broader environment isn't accessible. Many day objects, systems, cultures are often designed to this average one size fits all measurements. And those measurements usually happen to be white, heterosexual, able bodied, and male a lot of the time. And so we need to diversify the creators of the solutions of tomorrow. Because when there is missing data on those from minority backgrounds, when there's not enough diversity on the team, when solutions are being built, they end up falling short. Now, particularly looking at technology, this is an example, a very important example where if we start ramping up machine learning and artificial intelligence into our everyday lives, some of our societal functions, or even decision making, these blind spots, they will have detrimental implications to the health and livelihood of our community. Now, this was a story of a Mr. Williams. And Mr. Williams was arrested, interrogated, and held overnight in a prison cell for a crime that he did not commit. And it was the first case, known case, of an American being wrongfully arrested based on flawed match from facial recognition algorithms. Now, this is quite poignant. I don't know if you've watched the news today or the last couple of days, but there's some companies in Australia that are actually implementing image recognition, and this technology is not advanced enough. Unfortunately, the experts in technology law are saying that this technology works. It works relatively well on white men, and the results are less accurate for people of color or for even women. And that is because the lack of diversity in the data, but also the teams that are creating this technology. So I feel like you know where I'm going with this. What's at stake if we don't change the people coming into digital, the people who are going to be the creators of the code? And that's such an important area that we need to diversify, because if we don't address the gender gap in technology, women and men's needs, whether it's their health, their professional lives, their safety, or even recreational needs, they're so uniquely different to men that our experience of the world will continue to be negatively impacted, because the technology that we build today does determine the world that we're going to live in tomorrow. And so if it keeps being built by a small and homogenous representation of our world, it will never, ever be an equitable one. So there's many resources. If this is really inspiring to you, if you want to read more about the gaps in diversity and technology, here's some really great resources that I'd love to plug. So Coded Bias is a documentary, and it really tackles, the big tech from the lens of automated technology. So it does zero in at the sort of human costs to facial recognition, for instance. And I think that's particularly poignant today. Another resource, which I've already mentioned, is this amazing book by Caroline Perez. And this one's more of a newer one. If you're interested in how to create a better culture at the workplace, not entirely sure if this is the right audience for that book, but it's a really good one about inclusion. So as you can probably tell, I'm really passionate about this stuff. It really sort of lights a fire inside me. And so I'm now going to switch gears and tell you a little bit more about me personally. So this is where I get deep and meaningful, overshare a little bit. So I thought maybe I'd begin with a bit of a reflective moment. I want you to, I know that it's a mixed audience today. So some people might be, young, some people might be a little bit older, but really, we're still growing up, aren't we? I always ask myself, what do I want to be when I grow up, even at 34? But really just have a think about this question. And if you are in a career, like, is the career that you're doing today what you always thought you would do? Now, it's funny, I always had a dream when I was younger. To go to art school. If you told me that I'd become a technologist, that I would not only become a technologist myself, but maybe I would teach other people to be technologists, I really wouldn't believe you, because honestly, when I was younger, I knew nothing about computers or coding. I grew up surrounded by women, a house full of women. Um, I have three sisters, and my mum pretty much brought us up single handedly. And so we lived in a low socioeconomic neighbourhood. We lived in council accommodation. I went to one of the local public schools, and it was definitely not the greatest school. We lacked the resources to even run computing at an advanced level. But as I sort of mentioned, that didn't really bother me because I wasn't actually interested in computing or coding at all at school. And it's really funny sharing this with you today because when I was younger, I was really ashamed. I was really ashamed of our financial circumstances. And I never liked to talk about where I was from or where I lived because, and this is, I hope, I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people here, but like, kids can be quite cruel and they can judge you or name call you. And so school was a really challenging time for me. And now that I'm an adult, I still don't really like to talk about where I'm from. And that's not because I'm ashamed, but it's really the opposite. I am really proud of where I'm from, but I don't want anyone to draw any conclusions that I'm from an underprivileged background because I am very privileged. I grew up in Scotland where education and healthcare is free. Um, and I was born during a time where my parents, they encouraged me to go to university. I had society encouraging me to go to university. And I think the same thing now, like we live in an era where the barriers are coming down for women, and we should really lean into that. So to my parents' relief, art school was a really short-lived dream. So 2 years later, after leaving school, I was 19, and I decided that I just couldn't take another rejection letter. I applied to every art school in the country, and we were on number 5. So I had to change course. I had to pivot. I remember feeling that sense of failure and embarrassment about where I was at in my life. But sometimes you just have to take a redirection. Not plan A doesn't always work out. So here we go. I went on to plan B and I redirected my efforts and decided to start a computing science degree. Now, often people ask me, how did that come about? And this whole long-winded story of it was an accident. It was one of the last courses that was on the list, and they were still open to late applicants. So that is the truth. That's how I got into computing science. Um, Reflecting back, if it wasn't for my maths abilities at school, I probably wouldn't have got in. And I wanted to share this graph with you because a lot of people seem to think women aren't good at maths. It's a really weird myth. But actually, many girls are. Actually, we perform at a very similar level to maths as well as boys. But unfortunately, we choose different pathways to boys. And that's really interesting. And that's exactly, looking back at my own story, I didn't choose maths or computing right away. It was always my plan B. And so that's a common story. For many girls, they don't choose a career in engineering and computing at a young age. So only 4.7% of girls are considering this for themselves, which is why events like this are so important. Because you've probably heard this phrase before, but you can't be what you can't see. And I am always, up for talking at these events because there's not enough of us. And so the lineup today is honestly sensational. You're going to hear from a lot of amazing women in technology. But what do we mean when you say like you can't be what you can't see? Obviously, it sounds really obvious, but research tells us that girls are more likely to create and articulate their self-identity using adjectives, whereas boys, they tend to talk about themselves in terms of what they do using verbs. And for me, what I take away from this is that role models really matter to girls. Like, girls, they want to be someone. They don't just want to do something, you know? And when they do lack those real role models, um, you know, what can be really interesting is media can step in. So I don't know if you remember, anyone on this call remembers the X-Files. So the X-Files was a very popular show in the 90s, and there was an interesting phenomenon called the Scully effect. And the Scully effect happened when there was a spike in female STEM enrollments because Agent Dana Scully, she played this really cool, really smart, really loyal medical special FBI agent. And not only did it affect the watchers, the viewers themselves to choose STEM, they were also more likely to encourage their daughter or granddaughter to study STEM. So it was this ripple effect. And what's really cool today is it's still on things like Netflix or those streaming services. So it's kind of getting a second life, second wind, which is super exciting. So I find this stuff fascinating that, you know, when we lack real role models, how important to have these characters, these real, almost real characters in our lives. So you can start late, you can look different, and you can be uncertain and still succeed. I love this quote because it really resonates with me. Looking back, I was always quite insecure at university. I remember walking in to my computer science degree and looking around at a sea of men. And I was one of the very few girls in a class. Everyone seemed to have like a really solid knowledge, and remembering I'm from an arts and crafts and design background, I had no knowledge of computing. So from day one, I remember just feeling like, whoa, I am very behind. And so I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but I remember watching Legally Blonde for the first time and relating so hard to the main protagonist, Elle Woods. I felt like the treatment that she got, you know, everybody looked at her like, why are you here? She didn't belong there. And I felt like that for a long time in my computing science degree. Everywhere I looked were men. Um, and it's one of my proudest achievements graduating from my degree because, you know, any degree is difficult. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that my degree was more difficult than any others because I'm pretty sure that's the whole point. They're challenging. But it's a lot harder when you're a minority. And so, you know, the lecturers were men, the lab assistants were men, even the authors of the course books they would give you were men. And so, one thing I'll say, it's so easy to think that you can't do it when no one around you or ahead of you looks like you. But something magic happened. I fell in love with technology. I loved learning about human and computer interaction, the psychology of great technology experiences and how they're designed. Learning the tools and the code to create those experiences was the most satisfying skill I've ever attained. And I learned something super important. I learned that my arts and design background, whilst it was really quite different, was actually a brilliant marriage of skill set for technology. And I realized the importance of diversity in technology, not just about the experiences I had as a woman, but also my background was really different. And that became my strength. And so this is a quote from the legend, which is Grace Hopper. She's one of the first ladies of software. And she said, the most damaging phrase in the language, it's always been done that way. And so I really believe that women can bring so much to the world of technology. There's so many markets and products and problems that just haven't been solved yet. And we can do that. So you may not know this, but women haven't always been a minority in computing programming. In fact, in the early days, it was dominated by women. Men mostly actually worked in the hardware because software was seen as a more administrative task. What happened is the industry began to boom, more talent was required, and at the time there was more men working. But then 1984 happened, the year that women stopped coding. And I don't know if you can guess what happened, but the personal computer hit the mainstream market. And suddenly its core audience and target was men. Recruitment ads, even toys that encouraged tinkering and problem solving were pitched towards a male audience. And so sadly, we are here today because we have a massive diversity gap in technology. And you can look back and understand how we got to where we are today. Many people in my class, when I asked them how they got into tech, it started young. Lego, mechano sets, moving on to consoles and building PCs in their teens. I realised that Barbie and the Spice Girls, well, I think they might have betrayed me. So for decades, we've been sending boys and girls very contrasting messages, outdated stereotypes, limiting beliefs about gender and the intelligence of women, compounded by marketing agendas from technology companies. So it's going to be a while before we can turn this around. But one thing I want to leave on is technology is the fastest growing, best paying, highest need field in today's economy. Not just here in Australia, but globally. It honestly is a sure deal. When it comes to women in tech, they earn 33% more than those in other industries. But more than that, and I think this is really important, technology has been one of the greatest wealth creators of our time. And unfortunately, as I've sort of shared, women have been excluded from that. But what if we could balance it out? What if we could bring more women to the table and really balance that wealth around? Now, hopefully, my story is one that's inspired you and not made you not want to join technology, because really the message here is there's so many untapped um, needs that need to be met in terms of solutions of tomorrow. So I'm going to circle back and finish off by telling you just a quick how it all began. I changed companies, I changed countries. One thing didn't change, and that was the gender gap. You're a first female hire, Ali. How do you feel about being the only woman on the team? These were questions that were always presented at me to every job interview I went for. And it made me feel quite lonely. And so, I'd moved to Australia, and a year on from migrating, I had no friends, no family, no network. And so I decided to start a little website called Code Like a Girl. And I posted my first ever event here in Melbourne. I thought 10 people would maybe turn up if I was lucky, but I had 100, which I couldn't believe. Didn't know there was that many women in technology. And here they were at my event in Melbourne. I will never forget that night. It changed my life being in that room full of women who were accomplished computer scientists, coders, developers, many of them aspiring to be in these careers. And so since that day, I have really worked hard to build an organization that can take women from curiosity to a coding career. And if you're in the audience and learning to code is something that you would like to do, well, you can do it with Code Like a Girl. We have an amazing partnership with over 55 companies in Australia, and 70% of our interns go on to permanent employment. We're very lucky to be able to offer scholarships for women. So as a social enterprise, education pathways are accessible to all women of all backgrounds. And so if this is something that's resonating with you, please get in touch. We're going to move on to questions. So you can certainly ask me now if you've got any questions about our courses or our programs. But yeah, I am super grateful to be here, and I hope that this has been insightful. And if you want to reach out to Code Like a Girl, here is our website and here is our email address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ally. That was so fantastic. Some of those stats that you started with were so hard to believe. They're just crazy. So we had, that there are more men named Andrew running ASX 200 companies than there are women. That is absolutely crazy. Some of the stats you started with were fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Ally. We do have a few questions that have come through, so thank you for sticking around and answering them for us. What advice do you have for young women in the industry who are experiencing imposter syndrome? And do you have any tips or maybe some techniques to get past it?
Yeah, it's so imposter syndrome happens to us all, and I think it's more prevalent in minorities. But even as an adult, I feel myself getting pulled in to those negative thoughts. But ultimately, that is all they are. A lot of the time, they are just internal negative talk. And what you need to do is write down evidence against what that talk is telling you. A lot of the time, it's just it's saying that oh you don't deserve this success. It's you're here on a fluke. you know 9 times out of 10 you do deserve it, and you got to write down that evidence to negate what that negative self-talk is happening, and rewrite that script in your head. Because a lot of the time there's really no evidence against those negative thoughts.
So much. And I wanted to ask something as well. There are so many stereotypes of coders being in a little basement and living off nothing but pizza for a few days. What do you think about those types of stereotypes?
uh they're prevalent in the media, and I think that's where we sort of get that image from, that coders in the basement, like things like the Big Bang Theory, they're just not accurate, and it's really going against us because it's painting the wrong picture. Technology is extremely sociable. Writing to code is a collaboration. There's never a time you're writing something on your own. You're always in a team. You're always collaborating. Like, honestly, being a developer is like 50% meetings, 5% writing code, and about 45% debugging the code. A lot of the time, it does just require very good communication. And even when you're writing code, it's a very creative problem solving skill. It's not, it's actually super. Oh, it's super satisfying as a skill and very addictive as well. It's, but yeah, it's just not the way the media paints it. Sometimes it is very much creative and sociable, and collaboration is at the center of it.
All right, we've just got a question that's just come through right now. How can those who have been in IT for years, how can they help bridge this gap?
Oh, it's a great question. So a couple of things, if you're up for the challenge of being like an ambassador and an advocate, I think there is a disconnect between the industry and sort of people coming into it. So get out there, talk at events like this, especially if you're a woman. I know that you've got better like things to do with your life, but to be able to be a visible role model to others is really perfect. Um, and if you're in technology, I think it's about making it accessible for others. A lot of the time, there is a few gatekeepers in there. And so there's just a huge amount of curiosity and interest in technology careers. So yeah, I think it's about making it accessible for others, bridging that gap so that they can get a real insight to what it's like looking under the hood, of what a technology career is. A lot of the time, it's just people don't know how great and what the opportunities are like, and what a day in the life of a developer is like. So yeah, I think really just getting out and sharing that with others.
And we've had a few people be very sneaky and look at your website and know that you do offer internships. So can you please tell us what are the skills needed and how do people apply for those?
Yeah, excellent. Great question. So, yes, we've placed about 115 women into interns across Australia. And really, the requirements to get an internship is no formal qualification required. You don't need a diploma, a university degree, anything. But what you do need is basic programming skills, and you can get them off the internet. There's free courses out there, there's courses that we offer, there's courses everywhere. And if you can prove to us that you have a basic knowledge of coding through project work, so we ask for a portfolio of your own code, as well as we ask a few passionate questions. So, really, passion, a portfolio of your work. And usually it takes about a year of like self learning to code to get to that level that we would expect. But you do not need any formal background in coding or computer science to get an internship with Code Like a Girl and our partner companies.
How good is that? Thank you so much, Ali, for taking the time to chat and, of course, sharing your tips and your story with us. So thank you
My
very much.
pleasure.